Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. This is the fifth and final episode of our series, The C Word, Stories of Cancer. When we think about being young, we picture a time of exploration, discovering who we are. What we don't picture? Cancer. Cancer is supposed to be a disease of aging, not the concern of someone in their 20s or 30s. But there's a worrying trend in the cancer world where young adults are getting cancer at higher rates, and scientists don't know why. Kelly Spill was 28 years old when she was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. She was pregnant when she first noticed symptoms, constipation and blood in her stool. Her doctor told her not to worry. Lots of things change in your body when you're pregnant. But the symptoms didn't go away after giving birth. She saw a series of doctors. No one seemed too concerned. But Kelly, who spoke to me from her home in New Jersey, says she knew something was wrong.
I was waking up every day and I was like, I just don't feel good, but I couldn't really pinpoint why. I would just say to my husband a lot every day, I just don't feel right. I just don't feel right. And then one morning we were getting ready for work and I went to the bathroom. I looked down and there was just so much blood. And I called my mom right away and she said, I think our best bet is to go to the ER. And I said, okay. So during this time, my health insurance wasn't great. It was very hard for me to see a primary doctor. So that was our choice to go to the ER. I had explained to him what was going on. And he said, it's most likely internal hemorrhoids, lay off the spicy foods. And I was like, okay. And that's when I really started to feel defeated because now this is the third time someone telling me this. It's gotten worse. And there was no extra that he was doing for me. At that time, he called a family clinic in order for me to get to the top of the list and get me in sooner rather than wait. And at that appointment, I love telling this part because it sticks to me to this day that I had a nurse bring me back to the room and she had told me, if you don't find your answers here, keep searching because you know your body best. Nobody knows your body like you do. You know your body best. And I was like, okay. And that made me feel like I am feeling this.
That nurse probably saved your life, right? You had her voice in your ear.
Yeah.
Trust your gut.
Yep. Even to this day, having kids, I think about her to this day. I wish I remembered her name, what she looked like, but I don't. And if I did, I would go back and just say thank you and tell her how much she's made a positive impact in my life. But yeah, from there, I kept talking about to my family and friends, how I was feeling instead of not talking about it at all. And I finally had one of my friend's moms say, I think I know someone who takes your health insurance. Let me get you their information. And thankfully that doctor did. I went to that doctor's office. Right away, I showed her pictures of what was going on from when I was living in California, from when I was living in New Jersey. I was taking pictures in the bathroom the whole entire way. And she said, you need a colonoscopy, don't you? And I was like, yeah, like big time. And I was able to go that next week. And that's when I found out I had a tumor.
Wow. So how much time had passed since the first time you saw blood in your stool to the tumor?
At that point, my son was 8 months old, so it's easy to track at that point. So it was about 8 months.
So how did it feel to finally get an answer of what was wrong with you?
It felt scary, but it felt good to finally hear that what I've been feeling, there's a reason for it. But now it was, okay, now what's next? And at that appointment, I wasn't told that it was cancerous. They did a biopsy, and I had to wait 2 weeks to hear if it was cancerous or not. I knew during that time that it was. You just know. And the way that I looked in the mirror, I was just very skinny. I didn't look like myself. I didn't feel like myself. And I knew the news wasn't going to be good. So I think during that time, I kind of prepped myself for that. My mom and I were in Walmart. We were baby shopping. And that's when we got the call. And my first thought was, how? Because no one in my family has colorectal cancer. Haven't even heard of it. So that was an extreme surprise.
So what happened next? Did you have a treatment plan?
So at that point, thankfully, I have a very supportive mom. And together we made a plan of going to three hospitals, three different cancer hospitals. We basically had a small checklist. We had it on comfort level. We had it on what the response was with treatment. We had it on how far it was going to be from our house, their reputation. However, our first stop was Memorial Sloan Kettering, and it ends up being our first and our last stop. My appointment was in New York City. And at that appointment, that's when I learned that it was stage 3 chemotherapy, oral chemo, radiation, and then surgery.
How did you take in all of that? I mean, you're 28. You have
Mhm.
your whole life ahead of you.
My fiance and we had just gotten engaged. We had a baby very quickly. We just moved back to the East Coast. He doesn't have his immediate family here. I dragged him to New Jersey with me. And my first thought was, how am I going to tell him this? I was thinking about him most of the time. And then I had asked the doctor, we had plans to elope to Switzerland. And I asked him, like, can I at least elope to Switzerland this summer? And he was like, oh, absolutely not. I think that's when reality hit for me. Like this is changing my whole entire life at this point. And that's when I lost it.
Now, in doing this cancer series, I'm always struck by the young people getting cancer because a lot of times you're not just thinking about, how do I live? How do I survive this cancer? You're thinking about the life after cancer, which is actually very hopeful. You're thinking about that you're planning for your future still. And I know one of the things that was very important to you was, I mean, I think you wanted to have more children, right? I mean,
Yeah.
can you talk about how do you talk to your doctor about that? You have stage 3 cancer, and yet you also want to plan on having more children.
Yeah. So at that appointment, he had told me that I had time to either freeze eggs or embryos, whatever, which one I chose, which I was very thankful for because I know some people don't have the time for that. So we chose to freeze embryos. And I will say that was one of the hardest processes during this journey. It was the most painful for me. I had a tumor that was sitting a centimeter away from my anal canal, and then I was growing these eggs. And any woman that goes through IVF once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, I mean, I cannot imagine doing it more than once because it's just so painful. So going through that experience was very humbling. And after that, I got the call that we were able to save 4. We had 4 embryos, and I said, "Okay, so that's great, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, do you want to know the genders?" I was like, "Oh, that's cool." So actually hearing the genders of those embryos, it made me feel good again. Made me feel like I was doing something for myself that I was able to do, and able to do for my husband. It was kind of like a little bit of a rainbow in the sky that I was able to see. And after that, it was game on. It's time to think about chemotherapy. It's time to make that appointment, and it's time to get through the first part of my treatment journey.
How long did it take you to get to being cancer free?
So I started treatment in March and I was done in August. In March, I was setting that appointment for chemotherapy with my doctor, and I had a research nurse come in, and she had said to me, "We had some tests comes back about your tumor, and it came back with some positive tests that may allow you to go on a clinical trial. Are you open to hearing a different option?" And I said, absolutely. There was only 3 other people that had went on this trial, so the information was extremely limited. However, what I was hearing from her was that this treatment journey with this clinical trial would be a lot less harsh on my body than chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. So I chose to go on this clinical trial. I was the 4th one in the country to go on it. And I had no idea what my future was with this drug. I had no clue what it could do for me besides the fact of, let's see.
What year was this, and what was the drug? I mean, was it a matter of taking a pills or injections, or did you have to go to the hospital? What did it entail?
Yeah, so it was in 2020, and I had a port inserted, so it was through the port. It took 30 minutes for the medicine to get to me. I know chemotherapy is around 2 hours, so that's a big one in itself. And by my second treatment, I was already starting to feel a little bit better. By my fourth treatment, after my checkup, I was told that my tumor was halfway gone.
Oh,
And
wow.
by my ninth treatment, the tumor had completely disappeared.
Wow. So was that during that period from March to August?
Yes.
In wait, 2020, meaning during the pandemic?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. You had a lot going on.
Yes.
I want to just go back for one moment and early on your story when your mom and you just learned that you have a tumor and it's cancer. What was it like telling your fiance, and how did he react?
He's a very calm guy, thankfully. When I found out that I had the tumor, it was actually on his birthday. So I will
Oh
always remember
no.
that
Mm,
date.
mm.
We He took the news very, very good. I remember going up the stairs. He opened the door, he had a big smile on his face, not knowing what the news was going to be. And I just hugged him and started crying. And my mom looked at him and she was like, not good. Between my mom, me, my husband, my dad, the people that are immediate around me, everyone kind of just jumped into action of, okay, what are we going to do? What's next?
Mm. So once you have cancer, and I know this from firsthand, having breast cancer 8 years ago, um, other people with cancer, they find you. And so I was just wondering, did you run across other people your age getting cancer? And what are the stories that have stuck with you?
I actually did at that time. I had a really good friend who I grew up with. She went to graduate school with somebody who had just became a survivor of colorectal cancer, and she was diagnosed, I believe, around 27, 28 years old. And thankfully, in my case, I had her to bounce off of. So she gave me her phone number and she got me through my journey single-handedly. I mean, I had a great support system, but when you have someone that you can chat about that has the same exact cancer as you, and you could text them saying, "Oh my
Mhm.
goodness, I have to get a sigmoidoscopy, what do I do?" And there's just things during that journey that are very vulnerable that you talk about. It's very hard for anyone else to truly, truly get what you're going through physically, mentally, emotionally, financially. um, so having her during that whole journey, I mean, for me, it was a blessing.
Mhm. I had two cancer buddies too.
Mm.
I had two women. We were other women I know in my circle, and we had breast cancer at that same year, within months of each other, same treatment and same prognosis. So
Wow.
it was. So I get it. When I had breast cancer, I was 45, and I think the average age is someone in their early 60s. And I think with colorectal cancer, it's the same way. You don't find you're not supposed to find patients in their 20s and 30s and 40s with colorectal cancer. They're supposed to be in their 50s and 60s and older.
Yeah, I have thought about this a lot, and I have thought about it not even just thinking about just colorectal cancer, but cancers in general. In your 20s, it's so hard because everything is the beginning
Hmm.
of what you've been looking forward to from when you were a kid.
Hmm.
So when you throw colorectal cancer or colon cancer in the mix, now we're also talking about losing your fertility, whether you're a man or a woman, which is also scary at that age where you're starting to think about, do I want to have kids? How many kids do I want to have? I can't wait to have them. Maybe I don't want to have kids, but I can't wait to travel to all these places. And it's so hard because when I came out of cancer. When I went to survivorship, I thought it was going to be rainbows and butterflies, but it was so far from that. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a new mom still. When you're a mom, new mom, or just even, a little bit after that, you lose yourself anyway at that point. You're trying to figure yourself out again. So, it was very difficult for me to really figure out my future. It still is.
Kelly, so you're 5 years past your initial cancer diagnosis.
Almost,
So,
almost.
yeah, almost a big graduation moment, right?
Yes.
In the world of cancer. Can you talk about, I mean, one of the things I've unearthed in my podcast series is this idea that, a lot of times when we think of cancer, we equate it with death. But now, through modern medicine, there are a lot of us who are living and surviving. But that also, that idea of being cured, it's also complicated. I mean, it's almost like feeling, for me at least, it's almost like a ticking time bomb. I worry the cancer will come back or it'll pop up somewhere else because my body knows how to make cancer. I mean, how are you processing, being quote unquote cancer free?
So before I started treatment, it did go through my head of, how long do I have to live? And looking at my son, it really broke me thinking that. But being a survivor at this point, I try not to think about it. I think about, my doctors did an amazing job with this trial. I'm on a great path. So when I go through that in my head, I don't think about this cancer coming back.
Kelly Spill is a cancer survivor and patient advocate living in Tinton Falls, New Jersey. When we spoke to Kelly, she was pregnant with her third child. She has since given birth to a healthy baby boy named Nash. They're both doing well. Congratulations, Kelly. After this short break, we talk with oncologist Andrea Cercek of Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, the same hospital where Kelly got her treatment. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Kelly's thriving now, but her cancer story is a troubling reminder of a broader trend. Of all the people diagnosed with colorectal cancer in 2019, 20% were under 55. That rate has doubled in the last 2 decades. This increase in younger patients is pushing doctors to think differently. Andrea Cercek is an oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. She leads the first clinic in the world to specialize in young people with colorectal cancers. She told me she started the clinic after she realized that younger patients required her to take a more holistic approach to treatment.
It was really in response to these young adults that we were starting to take care of, where we realized that the treatment process was the same, but everything else surrounding it was very different in terms of their needs, their ability to kind of handle treatment, whether that was from a financial perspective or from support. Many of them were single. And so we really wanted to focus on all the support that we could provide at the time of diagnosis, through treatment, then and also in survivorship. When, as an oncologist, you meet an individual, and particularly in the colorectal cancer world, many of them had advanced disease, and so you want to start treatment right away. So a lot of these support services or these ancillary services kind of fell by the wayside, and we realized that really that was not okay. It wasn't okay for our patients or for our caregivers.
I mean, what do you mean by those ancillary needs? What do these kinds of patients need?
So it's a great question. I think the most, important thing is when you are diagnosed with cancer, obviously there's a lot that goes into that, from just wanting to fight, but then needing support, your caregiver support, providing caregivers with support.
Right.
And especially young adults, many of them were just starting families. So fertility was incredibly important. And then I think the most important intervention actually has been social work. So what we established was a meeting with our social worker who's dedicated to just seeing our young adults. That first conversation, some find her incredibly helpful, continue the conversation on a personal level. She's done couples counseling, caregiver alone counseling. And then most of our patients just really want to know, how do I talk to my kids?
So I want to go back to this question of fertility. But before we go on, I mean, you're the doctor. I'm not. I mean, I think a lot of our listeners like, what is colorectal cancer? What are some of the symptoms and how common is it?
So colorectal cancer involves the large bowel, and then it goes all the way to the end of the GI tract in the pelvis. The signs and symptoms are really associated with where the tumor is in the gastrointestinal tract. So oftentimes, if the tumor is at the end of the gastrointestinal tract in the rectum, the stool is already formed, so the person can have blood in the stool, constipation, a really hard time evacuating. If the tumor's on the other side, oftentimes they can present with just anemia. They don't really know. They're just feeling more and more tired. And then
Really?
they have this,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and then they are found to be anemic or weight loss. And then all of it can really cause a change in bowel habits. So either looser stool or constipation, and then unexplained abdominal pain. So I think the most important thing is, if any of these symptoms come up and they last more than just a few days, it's important to seek medical attention.
And I guess when you're younger, you don't immediately think, oh, I've got colorectal cancer, right? I mean, is that why perhaps it might take a little longer to diagnose these kinds of cancers?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we initially thought, when we first started to look at this, that this disease was just very different and much more aggressive. But what we actually later learned through very nice large surveys is that most of these young adults actually have symptoms for more than 6 months, are either too busy, kind of dismiss them, or they actually have to see multiple doctors before they're diagnosed, because nobody really thinks, oh, colorectal cancer in a 35-year-old.
What other cancers are we seeing more of in young people besides colorectal?
It's actually very scary. We're seeing a rise in a number of cancers. So it's throughout the entire intestinal tract. So esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, gastric cancer, pancreas, appendix, and then, as we talked about, GI cancer. But then there's also increase in breast cancer, as well as certain GYN cancers, certain liquid tumors as well. And so there does seem to be this kind of general trend of an increase in young adults with cancer.
And I mean, what's your best guess? Why is this happening?
The honest short answer is we don't know. We assume that it is an exposure, so an environmental factor, or most likely factors. There's something multifactorial that's occurring. And I think the reason, that we think this is because it truly is occurring all over the world. It's not just in countries of high socioeconomic status where you might think, okay, there's something that is different in behavior or in exposure, but even countries of lower socioeconomic status that are starting to have registries, they're seeing this exact same trend. But what it is, we just don't know. And thankfully now everything is under investigation, from lifestyle changes, being more sedentary, watching TV, things that we're ingesting from foods, to just exposures in the environment, medications, as well as things like microplastics that are just kind of everywhere in the environment that might be changing our bodies.
I mean, that's just as scary if it's everything.
Absolutely.
Right?
No, that's absolutely right. It is. And, the hope is we may not be able to identify exactly what it is, but I think the goal of research is to see not necessarily what it is, but what are the changes that are occurring, and who are those individuals in which these changes occur and then lead to cancer, right? So maybe there's some other unifying factor that we could find. And then the goal, of course, would be to find these individuals and then screen them early to prevent this from happening.
So is it kind of like breast cancer, where if there's early detection through a mammogram, and I guess in the case of colorectal cancer, a colonoscopy, you might have a better chance of detecting the cancer. But I think in the U.S., the doctors recommend colonoscopy only starting at 50, right?
It's actually been lowered to 45.
Oh, really?
Yes, and
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
this was in response actually to this early onset colorectal cancer rise. So now
Mhm.
it's 45. However, the steepest rise in young adults is actually in the 20 to 30-year-olds, and we still see a lot
Oh,
of individuals in that 40 to 45-year-old age group that are not recommended for screening. And it's complicated because screening is expensive and it's still relatively rare in terms of incidence in young adults, despite the fact that it's rising. And so, 45 was kind of the best that we could do. I think the goal is, though, exactly as you said, this cancer is preventable. If you do it colonoscopy early enough, you could remove that polyp and prevent the cancer from occurring. So what's going to happen, and where there's a lot of great research ongoing now is and progress is in other ways of detecting colorectal cancer. So early detection either through blood tests or stool tests. And I think that is going to be really the future that will hopefully, change outcomes drastically for colorectal cancer.
so I want to get back to patient care here. Can you share some anecdotes about some interactions you've had with younger patients that have changed the way you think about how you treat cancer for young people?
One patient who really struck me and really kind of inspired this clinic and these early introduction of support services, in particular social work, was a young woman with rectal cancer. So again, rectal cancer is located in the pelvis, and so treatment is quite toxic with chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. And she went into early menopause and then needed the very morbid surgery, which in her case was a permanent colostomy and a very extensive surgery that left her with significant sexual dysfunction and early menopause and infertility. But the cancer was gone, and there was no signs of cancer, and she was cured. And I remember I went in, to tell her, like, your scan looks great, you're cancer free, this is amazing. And I had this huge grin on my face, and she just looked at me and she said, you know, this is not living. That's great, but it doesn't matter, because if I knew that this is what my life would be like in survivorship, I wouldn't have chosen it. And I was just, completely floored, because it, we live for that cure. That's what we want. That's what
Hmm.
we work for. That's, the goal of all of our interventions. And obviously it's a hugely important goal, but then you realize there's so much more to curing the cancer, right? There's that whole part of survivorship and leaving our patients as equipped as possible to deal with life after cancer. They're never going to forget that they have cancer. They're always going to be a cancer patient, and we can't get rid of that. We can't minimize that. But if I just thought, if we could have supported her better from the beginning, prepared her better, maybe it wouldn't have been as difficult for her as it was. And so this was the idea, do we have this support services, social work, psychology, psychiatry early on? It's not for everybody, but I do think that for certain people that would make a big difference. And that's kind of what really inspired me. And I think about her all the time.
While reporting the series, I was struck by how much progress has been made in the world of cancer treatment. I mean, survivorship is higher, deaths are lower, but the main exception is this trend of young people. And so, how scary is it for you to work in this, somewhat dire, little understood corner of oncology?
I mean, I think it's scary in that the trend is alarming. And when you keep seeing, you're aging and your patients keep getting younger, and that's very, very difficult. But as I mentioned, I'm an optimist. I'm a researcher. I, believe in progress. I think we're already making progress. So to me, it just kind of inspires me to try to do better by my current patients and my future patients, not only in supporting them through this, but in actually doing the research to make treatments better for them. And then also in the preventative space, try to figure out why this is happening and how we can prevent and stop this trend.
So, I mean, with that said, I mean, is there one thing that gives you hope in this space?
I think we've seen a lot of progress, even though it's challenging to see more young patients in clinic, I would say each year. I think we've definitely made a lot of progress in terms of treatment of early stage disease with less toxicity. There's going to be a lot of progress in treatment of colorectal cancer, not just early stage, but also metastatic in the next few years.
Dr. Andrea Cercek is a cancer doctor at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. She's the founder and director of the Center for Young Onset Colorectal and Gastrointestinal Cancer. Thanks so much for joining me on Say More.
Thank you so much for having me.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Cusper and Caitlin Herrick. Music and engineering by Uzair Ahmed. Our editor is Jim Dow. We want to hear how cancer has touched your life. Email us at saymore@globe.com. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.